Okay, roll call for Senate Revenue. Senator Case?
Present.
Senator French?
Here.
Senator Ide?
Here.
Senator Pappas?
Here.
Chairman McEwen?
Here.
All present, Mr. Chairman.
All righty. The first bill we'll take a look at is Senate File 163, Partial Tobacco Products Tax Repeal. Senator Pappas.
Good morning, Chairman and committee. Today I bring to you Senate File 163 Partial Tobacco Products Tax Repeal. Just as a little background, my intent originally in this bill was to remove well, not to remove, but to change the excise tax on cigar products. Pretty much all other products are taxed by the unit. Cigarettes are 3 cents a cigarette, and snuff is 60 cents an ounce, and everything is by weight. I even think alcohol is by volume. But cigars are taxed on price. And so my intent originally was to come and just put a unit tax on it, similar to cigarettes. But when I got into looking at the entire statute and in consultation with the Department of Revenue and with the many of the dealers out in our state, it became apparent to me that the administrative overhead to collect this tax is huge. And if you look at the fiscal note, you know, we're not collecting a whole lot of money. I think the note says $6.7 million. And so in consultation with the Department of Revenue, I asked them to look into actually just repealing the excise tax on all tobacco products except cigarettes. So we looked at that and ran it across to some of the dealers. Their effort, and hopefully some will be online to be able to testify, the effort that they have to go through to produce the monthly and quarterly reports, and also the effort that the Department of Revenue has to put through. It seems like a great administrative overhead for the few dollars that we're collecting. Plus, this excise tax, we've had a very difficult time, if not impossible time, as I understand it, to collect it from online sales. We do collect sales tax easy enough now because of the Wayfair decision, but trying to get excise tax collected has been difficult from online, but we mandate it from our local people, so it puts our local people at a disadvantage. So after looking at it all, I decided, well, maybe the best thing to do is just take the excise tax completely off of all tobacco products except cigarettes. So what that means is cigarettes anything with a paper wrapping will still have an excise tax of that 3 cents a cigarette. But anything else, moist snuff, pipe tobacco, cigars, vaping product, well, actually most vaping products are not even taxed today. Certainly none of the synthetics are taxed. So anyhow, it seemed like a really good cleanup. Take a lot of the workload off of a lot of people, our dealers and the Department of Revenue, and fix that unfair tax on cigars that I was initially wanting to do. So if I may, I'll just go through the bill real quickly. And I have Brett Fenning here from the department because he helped me draft this, and there's a lot of probably clarification he can probably bring to it. But So on page 2, we're modifying the definition of wholesalers. This was not part of my original issue, but it's been unclear how we define the wholesaler. So this language, the department thought would be more precise. So instead of whether located within or without Wyoming, we just say regardless of physical location. So that's kind of just cleanup language. Then we put a definition of cigarettes in the statute because there's not one there now, and typically we're using the definition from the federal government. So that's what you see there. Page 2, you'll see that on the section on imposition, we're just striking nicotine products and adding cigarettes. And that'll be on 3 locations on page 2, since we're now only going to be taxing cigarettes and not all nicotine products. Page 3, you can see the same change there on line 10. And then at the bottom, this is striking or the month following the end of the calendar year quarter for nicotine products other than cigarettes. I think Brent could probably clarify why that needed to be changed. Would you like to add why that one needs to be changed, Brett?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brett Fanning, Department of Revenue, Excise Tax Administrator. So as Senator Pappas outlined, the timeline reporting on page 4, lines 20 through 23, just relates to when you have to send in your tobacco tax to the Department of Revenue. And nicotine products was a definition that was added a few years ago with the inclusion of the tax on vapor material. And so this is just the cleanup language saying, hey, we're really just worried about cigarettes.
Yeah, so it's taking the other than cigarettes out. Thank you. Page 6, again, same cleanup language on line 14. Or that was on page 5. And then page 6, there is one change that we put on line 8. Cigarettes seized in accordance with paragraph C1 of this section, instead of shall be sold by the department, is a may. And the reason for this is sometimes there's a very small quantity and it's just not worth it to the department to sell it. So they would dispose of it, they would destroy it. Might be easier to destroy it, but this statute requires it to be sold. And so it's just a cleanup to make it easier for whoever needs to dispose of these products. There's a whole lot of repealers. I think I'll allow Mr. Fanning to explain the repealers. I do have a lined up copy of the statute with the repealers if any of the members would like. But basically what it's doing, it's removing all the language that deals with the products that we are now not going to tax. It's pretty straightforward, I think. Certainly I can provide you a lined up copy if you like, a lined out copy. So that's the bill. It goes into effect July 1st, 2025.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. Anybody who wants to testify?
Any questions first?
Oh, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Pappas, I like your bill here a lot, actually. Full disclosure, I'm a snuff purchaser, so just thinking out loud here a little bit, what about, it's paper rolled, what about the old Bull Durham roll your own? Where does that fall into the repealer category? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'll turn that over to Mr. Fanning to answer, but I would think it's not rolled in a in a cigarette, so it'd be like pipe tobacco. If you buy loose tobacco, it's not taxed. Is that correct? Thank you.
Any other questions? We'll try this again. Thank you, Senator Pappas.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Chairman McEwen, members of the committee, my name is Rhea Parsons. I represent the Wyoming Prevention Action Alliance, which is a substance abuse prevention and mental health network under the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. Thanks so much for allowing me to come up here and talk today. First off, I need more information, I think, about vaping products and nicotine products and how they're taxed. I'm afraid I don't know a lot of information according to what they were saying earlier. But this is what I will tell you, is that across Wyoming and across the country, cigarette use is trending downwards amongst youth and adults and is trending upwards amongst youth and adults around vaping and nicotine products. Vaping is still the second most common type of substance use reported by youth, just behind alcohol. And again, current cigarette smoking among Wyoming adults has been declining. Adult current smoking rates have decreased from 18.5% in 2020 to 14% in 2023. So tobacco or cigarette use has definitely been declining. Amongst adults, as it relates to vaping and electronic nicotine delivery systems, use has significantly increased from 7% in 2015 to 10% in 2023 and is now approaching current adult cigarette smoking rates. So the primary concern I have is that we have cigarette use, which is on the decline, which is pretty much the only tobacco delivery system that's currently being proposed at taxing, while vaping is what is currently on the increase, and we're discussing potentially not taxing that. Now, again, I say that with the caveat that I'm apparently not as well as informed as I thought. If vaping products are not getting taxed at the level that they should be or aren't being taxed at all, I don't know. But this would be a concern for sure as it relates to substance abuse prevention, in that typically what we see when products are taxed at a higher rate, use rates often go down. And so from our standpoint, our concern would be that since we already have this trend happening of nicotine products being on the rise, that not taxing them at all would be a potential detriment to public health.
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jan Cartwright, representing the Wyoming Public Health Association. This bill definitely brings me back to much of my 25-year career in health, and specifically tobacco prevention. Tobacco in all its forms is not a safe product. Many lives are lost each year due to people's use of tobacco, primarily cigarettes. Tobacco taxes are one of the best ways to keep young people from becoming addicted to what will become an extremely difficult habit to quit. I ask that lawmakers not look at just the revenue from a tax compared to the negative outcomes that will result when more kids begin to use alcohol or begin to use tobacco. While I'm unsure of the total impact of this bill, the fact that we're repealing taxes is counter to everything that my work has done, and that the history of this Revenue Committee has been, that the Revenue Committee would measure the difference between the tax itself against the impacts of a tax. When the Master Settlement Agreement was signed in the late 90s, it was a way to repay states for their share of medical costs due to smoking. At that time, tobacco products in Wyoming were taxed two ways. cigarettes were taxed per stick as they are today, and all other tobacco products, no matter their makeup, and of course this was before vaping, all other tobacco products were taxed based on the wholesale price. Then, a few years later, the chew tobacco industry also signed a settlement agreement to stop marketing to kids because we had, at that time, a very high rate of our students using spit tobacco. And then a decade later, one of the chew tobacco makers argued successfully that their product should be taxed based on weight, since it was lighter than the other products and gave that company a price advantage in the marketplace. So even the industry recognizes and agrees that buyers are price sensitive. I would like to remind the committee that the cigar manufacturers were the ones who requested a tax change several years ago. Senate File 42 in 2023 was successful in changing when the tax is levied to after the cigar is sold. At the same time, that same committee sponsored a bill to increase taxes on cigarettes to $1, which isn't even enough if you compare us to other states. That bill failed. So my argument here today is that this bill moves taxation in the wrong direction, that we should be talking about and looking at the difference between what the state pays for people's tobacco use versus what the state gets in income. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Well, thank you for testifying.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Laura Lewis, and I'm here representing the Cigar Association of America. And as mentioned before, we have been working with the senator and the department to address an imposition issue in current statute. And the bill that's been brought before you would resolve that issue. And certainly if for any reason this bill is not successful through the full process, we are committed and look forward to continuing to work with the department. With that, I stand for questions.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mike Mosier, Wyoming State Liquor Association. We support this bill. It came of a bit of a surprise, but on the other hand, considering we have about 400 members, many of which sell tobacco products of one form or another, we see it as more of a policy decision than about any specific product as to whether the excise tax is worth it. And it would benefit our retailers in the sense that I used to joke, and it's probably still somewhat accurate, that the average Wyoming male couldn't tell you how much a loaf of bread or a dozen eggs are gonna cost, but they know how much a six-pack of beer and a pack of smokes cost. We're pretty price sensitive. Now, admittedly, the pack of smokes may have moved to a roll of nicotine pouches, but the same applies. We're highly price sensitive about these issues. And so whenever that price fluctuates one way or the other, you're going to see cross-border sales. And in that sense, it does help Wyoming retailers. Now, you can talk about sin taxes and all that stuff. I don't think reducing the overall price 20% or so on these products is going to increase the number of users, but will it drive people more? I mean, we all know that there's corners of the state, this corner being one of them, the southwestern corner being another one, where there already is a lot of cross-border sales. So I think Wyoming retailers would be able to sell more product just because of that price difference. And so for that reason, we do support it. Now, as some of you know, tobacco taxes of one shape or another have changed pretty dramatically. When I was a retailer, some of you remember those days, I didn't used to pay sales tax on tobacco products. That was they were tax exempt. Well, we've added and changed a lot of things, but in this particular case, we're not really touching cigarettes per se. We're dealing with products that, like I said, are highly price sensitive and may benefit our Wyoming retailers just in the sense that it'll just push a little more business their way. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm happy to take questions.
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you for testifying. Anybody else wants a crack at this?
Mr. Chairman, we do have several people online who would like to testify.
Let's go online.
I'm admitting Donovan Short.
He's not on the list. Welcome to Revenue.
Hi there, Mr. Chairman and members. Thanks for the time, and thanks to Senator Pappas and to Representative Filer for bringing it forward. I think it's a good idea, and I speak on behalf of Casper Cigar Company, my small business here in Natrona County. It's one of those things where it's a double-edged sword for us. On the one hand, you have this ad valorem nature of the tax, and I think there are just a lot of unintended consequences, as Mr. Fanning from DOR and Senator Pappas have pointed out in some of their discussion, where things have just kind of been cobbled together, over multiple bodies, multiple sessions. And it's one of those where sometimes the juice is really not worth the squeeze. It's a very laborious tax for us. I am focused primarily just on the premium cigar and pipe tobacco piece of this, which falls into that OTP, other tobacco products category. And it's one of those where most of us are sole proprietors. So it takes days per quarter, 4 times a year, obviously, where we have to kind of, hunker down and do a lot of manual math calculating this tax out. There are a lot of different inconsistencies in how different products are treated, how different wholesalers that we get these products from are either bound by statute or not to collect this tax on our behalf. So all of that has to be cobbled together quarter by quarter. It means that, I'm off the road. I can't travel for business during those times. I had a lot of family deaths and things that happened back home in Alabama last year, and was actually hopping on planes just to come back in that 15-day window after each quarter to go through this paperwork and spend a few days administrating this tax. It was mentioned SF 42, which was the effort a few years back that changed the time of collection. It didn't do anything about the tax itself, but in that instance, again, there are, people that are kind of bound by statute that have to do it 2 separate ways for, exactly the same tax. So it's a lot to administrate. And I would mention too, for, the prevention folks, who are duly noted, there are single products that I sell as a retailer where a person comes in maybe once a year, to have a cigar on their birthday, and they get something from the top shelf. You would have to consume over 200 cigarettes to encounter the same amount of excise tax that you'd find in one premium cigar in a lot of those cases. And I can tell you that that's a pretty dramatic difference in health impact as well with this tax. So again, I think everything has been well-intentioned, but I think at the same time, there's just been a lot of confusion and unintended consequences. And regardless of how they were intended, it's consequences just the same. So I appreciate the consideration on this and for bringing it forward, and happy to answer any questions you've got.
Senator Case.
Thank you, sir. And what's your name again? I'm sorry, I want to.
My name is Donovan Short. I'm the owner of Casper Cigar Company here in Casper.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Mr. Chairman, if I could, Mr. Short, do you sell loose tobacco for roll your own cigarettes?
We do not. We obviously have a lot of requests for it. It's, again, the way these statutes go, it's a lot more laborious from a paperwork standpoint, from a reporting standpoint. It just adds layers and layers to what we have to do already. So even though, a lot of these other products being discussed would be beneficial to add in our business, we just cannot administrate it. So we choose not to. So I do sell loose pipe tobacco, which qualifies same as cigars under OTP, but it's intended for pipe smoking only.
Do you sell rolling papers?
We do not.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much for the time.
I'm admitting Jackie Simmons.
Okay.
Jackie needs to turn on her audio and her video.
Hi. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jackie Simmons. I am the Government Relations Director for Wyoming for the American Heart Association. We urge you not to pass Senate File 163. We are concerned about the public health consequences of this proposal. Nicotine is a dangerous substance in any form and can cause increased blood pressure, the hardening of arteries, and increased risk for cardiovascular disease. Taxation is one of the best methods we have for discouraging nicotine use, particularly among young people. Taxes on nicotine products have been shown to drive down smoking prevalence. Tobacco control efforts have helped prevent an estimated 8 million premature deaths since the 1960s nationwide, while also reducing smoking rates by half since the early 2000s. This is in large part due to increased taxes on tobacco products. However, if Wyoming were to take this drastic step of ending taxes on most tobacco products, the state could see significant increases in nicotine-related diseases. I want to be clear that excise taxes have the greatest effect on nicotine use in the ages 18 to 24 age group. 91% of smokers in Wyoming first tried a tobacco product by age 21. Youth are particularly sensitive to price changes. So we have heard how these products are very price sensitive, and that is particularly true among young adults who are first picking up this product. Because taxes are known to drive down use among ages 18 to 24, responsible taxation is an essential way of curbing youth smoking and e-cigarette use. One of the most concerning pieces of this proposal is lack of taxes on e-cigarette products. I know we've heard a little back and forth about e-cigarette current taxation, but early evidence concludes that higher e-cigarette prices, inclusive of taxes, are associated with reduced e-cigarette use among teens in the U.S. Reducing youth use of tobacco products is essential as the brains of young adults are still forming. Vaping among adults and young people can cause increases in anxiety, irritability, learning difficulties, and impulsivity. It can also lead to future use of other drugs. Slashing taxes will lead to an increase in youth use of nicotine products and increased public health costs, but it will also significantly hurt the state's ability to pay for these increased public health costs. The state would lose over $6 million in revenue annually, yet it would be strapped with even greater costs for addiction treatment, cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, and cancer. In many cases, the cost of these diseases are not just passed to the patient themselves, but onto the general public through higher insurance premiums even for non-smokers, as insurance companies have to pay costs for these disease treatments, higher uncompensated care in hospital as people show up at hospitals with heart attacks, and hospitals and the state are forced to pay for those costs, and higher costs of those on public insurance. We urge this committee to reject this proposal due to its potential consequences that it would have on the state budget, its ability to address the public health costs of nicotine use, and most importantly, because of the consequences of increasing youth access to nicotine. Thank you for your time, and I'm available for questions.
Questions? Well, thank you for your testimony. Who we got up next, Donna?
I'm admitting Nick Torres.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here for you. I am Nick Torres, representing the American Lung Association. Would like to join my voice with the other folks you've heard from the public health sector, prevention sector, or just relaying our opposition to the bill today. Tobacco is still the leading cause of preventable death and disease across the United States and in Wyoming. And as you've heard today, the state does incur pretty significant cost burden due to tobacco use. And in part, those excise taxes, as well as the master settlement agreement that you heard referenced are designed to help address some of those costs incurred. Wyoming is represented to incur more than $257 million in healthcare costs, for example, annually, due to hospital expenditures, nursing homes, and an additional $450 million in lost productivity. And that includes for loss of work due to hospitalizations and mortality from tobacco use. We know that increasing tobacco taxes is one of the most effective ways to reduce tobacco use, and that's been proven decades and decades of experience and across many states. Shows that that is one of the most effective policy tools we have to address tobacco use. The ways in which the bill addresses a number of products is particularly concerning. I think the way that the carve out for a large swath of products besides cigarettes, and you heard reference that increasing use among youth in the categories of nicotine pouches, of e-cigarettes, those would no longer be taxed, and the requirement for wholesaler licensure of those products would be waived as well. And so that's particularly concerning as we're seeing higher rates of youth use in those products. And so some of the focus on the bill you've heard has been on a particular type of cigar. However, the bill addresses a much broader section of tobacco products that I think should be a much bigger part of the conversation and consideration of the committee. Wyoming last raised cigarette taxes over 20 years ago. And so from the Lung Association's perspective, we would certainly, maybe agree with some of the sponsors' concerns around the outdated natures of some of the taxation in Wyoming on tobacco products. But we would draw exactly the opposite conclusion in that, Wyoming should really consider looking at its cigarette taxes and devoting more resources to things like oversight for those collection purposes. We also would recommend that other tobacco products, whether they're electronic products, cigars, et cetera, those tax rates should also be linked to the cigarette tax. And so when we increase cigarette taxes, we should be increasing tobacco taxes across the board. And you've heard price sensitivity mentioned, and that's because we don't want to encourage product switching, particularly among more price-sensitive youth. And so we would like to keep those taxation levels with some degree of parity, whether they're cigarettes or other products. I would just pause there and reiterate, thank you for the opportunity to testify and your consideration for opposing this measure.
Questions? Well, thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of other people on Zoom, but they haven't raised their hand yet. If they'd like to testify, oh, somebody just raised their hand. I'm admitting Luke Kavanagh.
Welcome
Mr. Chairman, can you hear
Revenue.
me?
Yes.
Apologies. Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Luke Kavanagh, the Managing Director of State Advocacy for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. I have the distinct pleasure of representing cancer patients, caregivers, and survivors in halls of government, many of which are or have been addicted to tobacco and nicotine. I'm urging you to oppose Senate File 163 for both the immediate and long-term consequences that I believe would follow. As you've heard a lot today, there's lots of concern from patient advocates about the long-term health impacts of reducing the tax on many tobacco products, not counting cigarettes. There's also a direct impact to the increase in cost of healthcare cost within the state. As you may know and have heard today, increasing tobacco taxes is one of the most effective ways to reduce tobacco use, and again, especially among young kids. I know our good sponsor suggested earlier in his testimony that Wyoming does not tax electronic cigarette products. According to the Center for Tobacco Free Kids, Wyoming does tax electronic cigarettes at 15% of wholesale I think the committee would do a good job of verifying if or if not you are currently taxing electronic cigarettes at an appropriate amount, and certainly take that into consideration before you would take action on this. Lowering the tax and therefore lowering the price of tobacco products is one of the major ways that the tobacco industry protects their bottom line. They use it to addict people with cheap products and keep them addicted. The cost of tobacco usage costs not just those who use the products, but all Wyoming residents. If passed, Wyoming will make tobacco nicotine addiction more affordable. And for a state that, according to the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, has the highest prevalence of youth smokers in the country, this will already exacerbate a growing challenge within your state. Which is why it's really important that tobacco excise taxes are applied to all tobacco products at an equivalent rate to encourage people to quit rather than switch to cheaper products and ultimately prevent youth from starting to use any tobacco product. At a time when tobacco use amongst youth is already unacceptably high, we should not be considering lowering the tax and using some products to subsidize the cost of cigarette usage. This includes electronic cigarettes, snus, loose tobacco, and other tobacco products as already been referenced. We're seeing a staggering use, about 29 to 30% of high school students who use cigars by the time they're 21. We recognize that there are a lot of different perspectives, and I can certainly appreciate folks having some concern about administrative challenges of paying their tax. We recognize that anytime we have an opportunity to look at administrative burdens is important, but should not be done without knowing the full well the long-term impacts of both the cost in terms of the buyer, as well as the long-term health impacts of the state. It's for those many reasons, Mr. Chairman and the committee, I respectfully request that you return Senate File SF-163 to its sponsor. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you'd like.
Well, thank you for your testimony.
That's everyone that raised their hand to testify, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you again. Brett Fanning, Department of Revenue.
Welcome back.
Thank you, sir. Just wanted to clarify some of those points again, just as far as the administration and how this tax is administered currently in the state of Wyoming. So vapor products, that was a discussion. Wyoming does tax vapor products. And as mentioned, it's 15% of the wholesale price or 7.5% of the retail price. So with this bill, just to reiterate again, it is to repeal the tobacco tax on moist snuff, generally cans you're gonna see in a store. Then it's also gonna repeal the tax on other tobacco products. So that's gonna include cigars, roll your own tobacco, dry snuff, loose leaf tobacco, and a variety of other products. Then it's also gonna repeal the tax on electronic e-cigarettes, vapor material. So those are those three categories that are outlined in this bill to be repealed. Now, Mr. Chairman, with that, we had mentioned about kind of the fairness issue and how this kind of all works. There are federal reporting requirements if you're gonna sell tobacco products across state lines. And they generally apply to cigarettes, moist snuff, and vapor material. It does not include cigars. So that is a point, as Mr. Short had referenced in his testimony, there is kind of this outside factor where some of the same rules don't apply to certain parts of the tobacco industry as opposed to others. And so that is a discussion that was had, and we had several years ago in the interim as well. All the tax that is collected on moist snuff, other tobacco products, and vapor material goes to the state general fund. That's important to note. Master settlement agreement. Okay, this big agreement back in the 1990s that reallocated tobacco tax or funds that were collected on cigarettes back out to the states. So back in the 90s, big long agreement. This one does not touch the master settlement agreement as far as I've been told from several legal entities. So as part of the PACT Act reporting, you've got if you're selling or shipping tobacco products across state lines, you've got to inform those states of the products that are being shipped into their jurisdiction so that they can apply their own state taxes. That is a challenge that we have right now, but there are constituents in every one of your districts that could get a tobacco tax and sales tax bill from the Wyoming Department of Revenue just to maintain compliance with PACT Act reporting policies. Mr. Chairman, the last point I had on here is nicotine pouches. In general, these are not taxed in the state of Wyoming. There's some provisions in our statutes that relates to tobacco derived from tobacco plant versus synthetic tobacco. In most cases, nicotine pouches, so what makes up a big portion of sales behind the counter, is not going to be taxed for nicotine pouches. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I think those are all my clarifying points.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fanning. In my testimony, and that last speaker mentioned that I testified all vaping. I didn't testify all vaping products, but there are all the synthetic products that don't contain, that aren't derived from tobacco are exempt, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, so the definition of vapor material is any liquid, solution, or other material containing nicotine or synthetic nicotine that is depleted as an electronic cigarette. So it's a little different than the tobacco tax when we're talking about nicotine pouches. So in general, if it meets that definition, is going to be taxable as tobacco tax here in Wyoming.
Okay, thank you. Also, how much, if you have a number, how much of all those vaping and pouch products out of the total sales is taxed and not taxed? Okay. If you have an idea.
Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, so just to clarify your question, so are you asking the difference between nicotine pouches and what is taxable and what isn't? Or are you asking for the breakdown on the classes of the repealer for this bill? Just my clarifying.
I guess I'm asking that, you know, if I walk into a convenience store and I see tobacco products, right? Some of the stuff behind the counter is taxable and some is not. How much of that is taxable and how much is not?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, the vast majority of that is going to be taxed as far as other tobacco products and the vapor material. Now and the moist snuff as well that you're going to see in the cans. It's when you get into the nicotine pouches where there is distinction on if it's derived from tobacco or not.
Thank you.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to take up smoking and I'm going to figure out the cheapest way to do this. So, Mr. Chairman, what's the tax on a pack of cigarettes?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, it's 60 cents a pack.
60 cents. And the retail price of cigarettes, it's like $6 or $7 a pack now, isn't it? Something like that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, yes. It varies, but yes.
And that includes, Mr. Chairman, does that include the federal tax? How does that work?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, yes, it does.
Okay.
Excise tax at times it can be difficult to understand. So if I were to go to a convenience store, gas station, anywhere where I can buy a tobacco product that's currently taxed under our statutes, I am not going to see Wyoming tobacco tax on my invoice. An excise tax, especially in the tobacco world and in the fuel world, it's all embedded in this overall price that I've got to pay. So when I buy that pack of cigarettes, it includes the federal excise taxes, it includes the actual product itself, markup, overhead, delivery, all of those good items. It's completely different than, say, a sales tax, where when I buy that pack of cigarettes, I can actually see I'm being charged sales tax on them. Completely different in the tobacco world where it's all incorporated in the price. And this tobacco tax has ultimately been paid up in the food chain.
And so, Mr. Chairman, if I'm trying to figure out the equivalent to, say, loose cigarette tobacco and rolling papers. So loose cigarette tobacco, what is the tax on that? And is a pouch of, how big are those loose? I'm trying to figure out the cheapest way to smoke here, so I want your help. If I buy, how much would I pay for a pack of, a pouch of loose tobacco equivalent to a pack of cigarettes?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, this is exactly the question that Senator Pappas has kind of proposed. A lot of different tax rates here, but we can go down this list. So cigarettes, the tax included in that is 60 cents a pack, at the $5 to $10 range per pack. Then if I go and I buy a pouch of loose leaf tobacco, it is going to be 20% of the wholesale price. Or if this helps in your calculations, Senator Case, 10% of retail. And so,
What's that work out to be roughly?
yeah,
Retail price?
yeah. So if a package of loose leaf tobacco is $10, then you've got 10% of that. So you've got $1 plus sales tax. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, how many cigarettes can I make with that, the pouch of loose leaf tobacco? And I realize I haven't bought the rolling papers yet, but we'll get to that.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, I'm gonna have to get back and do some math for you.
Do you think it's more than a pack of cigarettes? You know, I used to roll these things and they were always really tiny and scrawny and fell apart, but I think you could get more than 20 out of a pack, quite a bit more.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, Senator Case sounds correct.
And then rolling paper, how much is that stuff?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, not familiar with the wrap paper. My apologies.
Well, maybe, Mr. Chairman, what I'm trying to find out is, sounds to me like it's gonna be cheaper to just roll your own and maybe we could teach classes on that and get rid of the tax on it, and we could just encourage smoking that way. Well, then they wouldn't have filters, so they'd probably die off quicker, and then that would save healthcare costs, right? Sounds like a logical way to go to me.
Mr. Fanning, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Please go sit down.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before we're talking about rolling other stuff.
I did that too, Mr. Chairman. I was always lousy at it. It was in earlier days.
Okay, any more testimony?
Mr. Chairman. Just a comment. You know, if you recall a couple of years ago in Revenue Committee, I actually brought a proposal to increase the tobacco tax. I think it was to $1.20. And I think that, you know, if you're gonna try to discourage that, you need to increase taxes a lot more than we've got. But we don't do that in Wyoming, okay? And it's not, we've decided we don't want to do that, okay? So I'm not opposed to certainly discouraging smoking. That's or vaping or any of those. It's just that looking at the effort that our tobacco retailers are having to go through and the effort that the department has to go through for the amount of money, it's just not, to me, a wise way to go. And you know, as far as the youth, you know, yeah, they probably are doing more vaping, but certainly they're not smoking cigars. They're probably going to the other products, and you know, I probably, if someone would want, if we do pass this bill, and we certainly could put the vaping product, take the vaping products out of it, and still continue to tax them. But I just think that first of all, the cigar tax, I think, is unfair, as is the snuff tax by weight. I think it ought to be by volume, and now it is by volume, I think, though. So the cigar tax is not fair because it is by price. But, you know, I would, if we pass this bill, I would encourage, you know, those in the body that would still want to continue with the vape products. I'm not so concerned about those being an unfair advantage, because frankly, those are sold by many more people than the local tobacco shops that I'm trying to help, because they don't normally sell those products, but they are sold in convenience stores and everywhere else. But anyhow, I think that passing this legislation and then maybe tweaking it down the line, maybe, I mean, I'm open to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments? Close public comment. What's your pleasure? Second. It's been moved by Senator Pappas, seconded by Senator Ide. I think you did a good job going through the bill. I don't think we need to do that again unless somebody wants to. Donna, you want to call the roll?
This is a roll call vote on Senate File 163, partial tobacco products tax repeal. Senator Case?
No.
Senator French?
Aye.
Senator Ide?
Aye.
Senator Pappas?
Aye.
Chairman McEwen?
Aye.
We have 4 aye and 1 no, Mr. Chairman.
Senate File 163 is passed the Revenue Committee. We will now move on to Senate File 177. Senator Smith.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Would you like me to move forward, Mr. Chair?
What's that?
Would you like me to start talking about the bill?
Well, introduce yourself first.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the distinguished members of this board for having me here today. My name is Darren Smith, and I represent Senate District 6, which is 2/3 of Laramie County and all of Platte County. With that, this bill that you have before you is the primary residence property fund bill. Throw out your box with this, guys. It's like nothing that's been presented so far in this session. It comes, nothing comes even remotely close. It's got a lot of ingenuity. It brings property tax relief without touching the budget, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But first, the goal of this bill is to bring tax relief to the people that are being choked out, all the while putting money in the hands of every family, especially working class families and seniors. Relief will come to every homeowner, but especially to the people that make the rubber hit the road, the shareholders of the state, which are the homeowners. The reason this bill doesn't touch the budget is because it is paid for from the surplus, and it is only paid when Wyoming is doing well. So think of it like a corporation, guys, that pays a dividend to its shareholders. That only happens when the company is doing well. This bill works the same way. If the state does well, then the homeowners are rewarded with a dividend. In business, after the shareholder dividend is paid, then the company looks to put money in savings or grow the business, et cetera. In nearly identical fashion, Wyoming will pay its shareholders, which are the primary resident homeowner property taxes, then look to set aside money for savings and other expenditures. Here's the beauty of this bill. It makes the legislature accountable to being good stewards and wisely spending the people's money. If the constituents know that a rebate is possible when the state runs in the black, our constituents will be motivated to look at what kind of a job we're doing and how we are steering this ship. So we've got great sponsors on this bill, as you can see, including the chair of the House Revenue Committee. I also, I put something on your desks. And for those out there that are listening, if there are folks that are tuning in, they can go to wytaxreform.com. And on page 5, they can see in that report, there's a study. And it basically shows kind of what's happened with Wyoming's finances. And property taxes since 2000 are up over 400%. And the size of Wyoming government is up over 300%, while income has only doubled. So with that, I'll get into the bill. If you'll go to the first page of the bill, section 1, it just sets up the account to be known as I've already said, the residential property tax reduction account. If you look on page 2, line 10, you'll see that section 2 and on, all it really does is it directs the surplus or excess general fund appropriation to be diverted under subsection J, which is on line 20, to this account. If you go to page 3, you'll see that while leaving the necessary and statutory required minimums of 5% in the general fund, basically that it diverts the surplus to this fund. So if you'll turn to page 4, it talks about how this is paid out. And basically, if you look at from line 12 on, it talks about how it's done. And basically the homeowner must apply for a refund. And then if you go to page 5, you'll see in line 2, section B, that amount is up to $13,300, which is $2 million in property tax value. So pretty much, and that if your home was worth $25 million, you could apply for this refund as well, and you'd get the first $2 million off of your taxes in a refund as well. So if you go to line 9, section C, you'll see that this account is funded every 2 years. So half pays out in the first half of the biennium and half pays out in the supplemental year. So this levels out the payout. So if you'll go to page 6, then the last big part here is who gets paid. And the primary residence is clearly defined. It means residential property where the person claiming the refund actually resided for not less than 6 months of the applicable tax year. All right, so with that, guys, I'll open it up for questions.
Questions? Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I think I understand how you get money out of the fund. How does money get in the fund?
Good question, Senator Case, and it'll be from the surplus. So after everything is paid during the year, or as the budget is pounded out, anything that this body has decided is left over is the surplus, and it'll be paid from that.
So, Mr. Chairman, I need help with that a little bit more. So, in terms of compared against the budget, it's money that we got in excess of the biennial budget, for example? Would that be surplus?
Right, in excess of the biennium budget that this body sets, anything in excess, the surplus will be, the first of that surplus will go toward this fund to pay primary residence property taxes.
And Mr. Chairman, it wouldn't include money that goes into our permanent funds or the increases in our permanent funds, or it would?
Well, it would include the interest that kicks out of the permanent mineral trust fund. That would be on.
So I guess what I'm kind of getting at is that, like, for ad valorem and severance taxes, for example, we withhold severance taxes, and we have a specific formula. The bulk of them go into the permanent mineral trust fund. is that money that's considered an expenditure? Is that considered part of the surplus?
I don't think it would be considered part of the surplus. I think it would be money that is left over after this body does its biennium. And what this body determines is the surplus, then from that money, this would be distributed.
So it's not automatic, Mr. Chairman. The legislature makes a determination of what the surplus is?
Correct.
So we do that at the start of every year, or how would that happen?
Well, it'll be every 2 years upon the biennium budget. So this body, like next year, we have the biennium budget, and this body hashes out how things are spent and how things are allocated. And then from there, if there is a surplus, which going forward, I think the macroeconomics for the state look well. I think there will be lots of surpluses going forward. There have been. I think 7 out of every 10 years, we've had some sort of a surplus.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I'm understanding right, this is perspective. So we would have a budget that we would pass and approve. And then we'd have a financial forecast. We call it the fiscal profile. And so, but those are both forecasts. The budget is going to be 2 years going forward. We don't know if there's going to be fires that are going to eat into the budget. We don't know if we're going to have to sue the feds over every 5 minutes. And then the forecasts are based on things like price of minerals and those things. So if they're both speculative and forward-looking.
This is not forward-looking. This is the amount of money that is left over in the coffers at the end of the supplemental budget that we have to distribute it. Sometimes it's put into the permanent mineral trust fund, sometimes it's spent other ways, but this money would be distributed to the shareholders, which are the primary residence homeowners.
So, Mr. Chairman, it doesn't rely on the budget going forward. It relies on how we performed in the budget that was passed.
Exactly, Senator Case.
And then similar, Mr. Chairman, it doesn't require the budget, the forecasts of revenues going forward, but it would be the achievement of revenues that we had from the past.
You were hired, Senator Case. Great description.
Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to follow on that thinking, so my understanding is we pass the budget and then we go through the 2 years and there's expenditures through the 2 years. So, and a lot of times departments or programs won't expend the money. It's my understanding then all the reversions that are going to come back will then go to this fund. Is that how?
Well, at the end of the JAC and when we get it all together and everything is hashed out, if some of those dollars are considered surplus by this body, then yes, those dollars will go into this fund.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Smith. Yeah, I think I'm tracking with you here. I just want to use a hypothetical. So 2 years ago, we had a supplemental budget of about $2 billion approximately. And of that, we spent, give or take, $700 million. And then we put the rest of it into, the permanent mineral trust fund or whatever savings vehicle. So I've seen another proposal out there where, and you've probably looked at it too, where you buy down property taxes, where in that situation outside of your bill, it would take 90% of that surplus and pay down property taxes, and the other 10% would go into savings essentially. So in this scenario, effectively, we do our budget and whatever's left over, if there's $300 million left over, that would be dispersed to the taxpayers as an economic development vehicle for everybody in the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, that would be correct, Senator Ide, and that study is, this bill takes a portion of that concept, the first part, and the whole concept is a little bit too much for one bill, because I can't get that through. So this is the first step in a plan to create a savings for residential property taxes. So if we can get, if we can get this through, then the next step would be, hey, let's create a fund that if we actually take the surplus, take 90%, pay everybody's property taxes, set the rest aside in an annuity or somewhere where it can grow, and then take 10% for the growth of government and so forth. And we do that every year. If that study, and I actually have given to you guys in over 20, if that were done over 20 years, then you would have, nobody would pay property taxes in the state again.
That's what I was gonna say.
Ditto.
Okay,
Can I ask about the 10%, Mr. Chairman?
yes.
So you just mentioned 10%. So there's been some studies, I think Pew Trusts have shown that Wyoming has the most volatile taxes in the country, mainly because of our reliance on the mineral industry, which those prices go up and down. So I think we could expect our revenues to be volatile. That's kind of, we are the most volatile revenues in the state. Our expenditures are steadier. And so if we always cut it to the bone, if we had a really super good year in minerals, and then we gave all that money back to the taxpayers, and the next year we could have a bad year, we don't have a cushion. But how does the 10%, we're gonna keep 10% back? Is that our plan? We could, I
Well,
guess.
in that study, that's the plan, but
Is it in this bill?
No, in this bill, this is just, I mean, hey, it does depend on, if the state does well, then we're gonna reward our shareholders. If there's a surplus, then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and pay down people's property taxes. Those are the main shareholders in this state, in my mind, are the primary residence homeowners. And so, yeah, things are volatile, and every year we might not have a surplus, but certainly in a lot of years we will. And this actually will be a sobering reminder that we report to the people, and they want a government run well.
And Mr. Chairman, what happens when it goes the other way?
Then nothing, then people will not get any property tax relief, at least from this avenue.
But if we don't have that cushion and we pass now, let's just pretend like, so there's a 2-year period, we pass a budget, we get through, we get 2 years later, we match the budget with the money that's come in. We say, hey, we did really well. Everybody gets a $10,000 check, made up number, whatever it is. The new budget starts, kicks off, goes 2 years, and we think we're gonna do well, so we pass a big budget. And then we're counting on, when we get to that next 2-year period, being able to give more money to people. But now we find out that not only can't we give any money to people, but we don't even have the money to cover what we've budgeted for. So what happens
Well,
then?
Mr. Chair, that money is already, that's money that's already dispersed anyway. So whether it goes into this fund, whether it goes into the LISRA or goes into the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund or whatever this body decides to do, that money doesn't stay there anyway. Surplus, something happens to that surplus every time. This just codifies that the surplus will be used to provide residential property tax relief first, before we do anything else. That money is already spent by this body in some fashion. It's not like it's sitting there waiting for a rainy day.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know that we've made it through budgets with money that we had put away, including the legislative reserve account, the LSRA, and we've been able to get through sometimes because of that. So I'm wondering if that's gonna put, what happens if we don't have those reserves to cover our budget shortfalls that are unexpected? So when we left here on the COVID time, back in 2020, the price of oil was basically zero. And it was, we all realized it was short-term, but we didn't know how long short-term was. And it stayed down pretty hefty because, there weren't any jets flying. It was just, it was tough on us.
Right.
What happens then?
Mr.
Do we have
Chair,
a special session?
this is not taking money from reserves. This is taking money from a surplus.
I've got to know the difference between the reserves he's talking about and the surplus, and where this money comes from.
Well, we have reserves set up, we have accounts, we have a LISR set up, we have all kinds of pockets of money in this state. In fact, I think if you add up all the different pockets of money, there's $32 billion in assets in the state of Wyoming. Now, I'm not recommending we get into any of it. I'm just saying that this state is not without resources. I'm simply talking about taking in a good year, just like Ford or Tesla or a company. They have a good year and they distribute some of their profits to their shareholders. And that's what this bill does. And it doesn't take from reserves. It takes from revenue that's come in, and the reserves are still there. It's not cutting anything to the bone. This is simply just good business and taking care of our shareholders. And our shareholders right now are hurting because they've been taxed in a higher proportion than their income has increased.
Senator Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Smith, yeah, I'm with you on the fact that the good senator next to me here talking about what happens if we have a big budget. I think that forces us not to have a big budget. I had, an old legislator that was in the House for 35 years. He said the most efficient and the best this state was ever run was during the oil bust of the 80s. And it just reins in big government effectively and makes everybody a lot more efficient. So that would be kind of my counter to that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Smith.
Thanks for having me, fellas. Appreciate it.
We have anybody else that wants to testify?
Mr. Chairman, Ken Gill, Department of Revenue. I know we're running short, so I'll make it quick. I can't really speak to the numbers or where the funds come from. Definitely isn't something that the department deals with on a daily basis. I will say we already administer a refund program at the Department of Revenue, and this bill would put that responsibility on the department also. Our current refund program, we have about 15,000 applicants. It's all hands in deck to run that. We cut off the application date by the first Monday in June, and we have to have checks out by the 30th of September. That's about 15,000 applications that we're processing with about 10 to 15 people. In this proposal, using census numbers and using numbers from the EAD, we're looking at about 175,000 applications at max. That would be owner-occupied homes in the state of Wyoming. So the department would ask for an appropriation. I know the sponsor has seen the appropriation from the department. Of course, there's some one-time costs for programming for administering this, and we got that from our ETS department, and that's about $182,000. And then we're going to need personnel to actually administer that many applications. We'll probably need around 40 to 45 temporary positions on a yearly basis. And then not to mention space for those folks to be in. So I would ask for you to consider appropriation for the department for that. And keeping in mind, this is just residential property tax. So it's not all property taxpayers. It is just the residential. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, Senator Smith.
I received an estimate from the LSO, and it was for about 1.6 million. Does that sound right, Mr. Gill?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct, Senator Smith.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Robert Short, Commerce County Commissioner. And reading through the bill, it just leads me to a question. On page 6, line 2, we describe primary residence as residential property where the person claiming the refund actually reside for not less than 6 months of the applicable tax year. Following on in line 7 through 11, residential property means real property improved by a dwelling designed to house not more than 4 families and includes associated residential land up to 35 acres where the dwelling is located if the land is owned by the owner of the dwelling. The question arises, if we're talking about a 4-family dwelling, maybe I think a quadplex, are all 4 families then eligible for the distribution of a tax refund? Presumably the dwelling may be owned by a single person, but also likely that the other 3 families that are occupying said dwelling may be indeed contributing to the tax burden that's paid on that dwelling. So will they be able to receive property tax relief? My presumption is that all folks in our great state have felt the impact of a rising tax climate. So are we going to offer refunds to all of those folks? And what about folks living in apartments or condominiums that are larger complexes? Are they also eligible with this 4-family dwelling limitation? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to try to answer that, because it seems to come up every time we talk about tax exemptions. In a perfect world, if the fourplex was owned by one person and he received the benefit, that should lower the rent. Will it every time? I'm not going to speculate, but that's kind of where it's set at. As property taxes go up, landlords raise rent, and as stuff goes down, they can drop the rent. Does that help much?
Mr. Chairman, I understand the sentiment, and I agree with you completely. In a perfect world, we would share that windfall with those folks who rent from us. I can't speak for anybody other than myself in that I would do such a thing. But I also know that across our state, everybody has felt the impact, whether they're owners or renters. As you've just mentioned, Mr. Chairman, as prices go up, so do the rents that people pay. And we may be putting them in a pinch where they're not able to afford living where they live as those prices increase. But in the effect of a refund, maybe we help them bear some of that heavy burden. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So you support Senate File 69 now? It's a joke.
No habla inglés, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anybody else? Well, we'll close public comment. What's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Second. It's been moved by Senator Ide, seconded by Senator French.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
there's actually a bill in the Senate to get rid of the budget reserve account. So I wonder how that would affect this if that were to pass.
It's a very good question.
Mr. Chair, may I answer that? I've talked to LSO at great length, and it won't affect it. It'll be what the surplus is that's designated by this body at the end of our biennium budget process.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I'm truly having trouble getting around what is the surplus. I'm sorry, Senator Smith, but I do understand how money gets in the budget reserve account. There's also the LSRA, and there are other funds. So I'm really having a hard time understanding is there a limit to the number that's calculated for the surplus? Is it a mathematical calculation, or does it have specificity?
Yeah, well, let's say that 11 billion, let's say that 12 billion comes in and we spend 11 billion. We have $1 billion left over that we need to do something with. Then right off the top, the first thing we do is pay homeowner residential property taxes.
Mr. Chairman, that sounds really good, except for we also have statute that directs us to make other places where those funds go. And so this is going to say notwithstanding all of those statutes? I'm not seeing that language.
Well, where there are minimums that are set, that money needs to be directed elsewhere, that's in the bill.
Call for the question.
So, Mr. Chairman, yeah, I'm with good Senator Freeman County there. I'm really confused about how this is gonna work. I'm gonna be a yes vote so we can get it up to the floor and figure out whether this has merit. Don't know that I'll eventually support it, but I really would like to hear from the budget office actually how this is gonna really work, where and how we're gonna be distributing these funds. I mean, is it gonna just go blanket across to everybody? I know we have the refund program that I'm thinking that this is how we give our money back to our citizens, but we give it back to people who are in need. Not so sure that I really want to give it back to everybody, because everybody's not in need. I'm not in need. I should pay my property taxes. So that concerns me a little bit on how the distribution goes back. And it's another program in addition to the refund program. So, I mean, I'll be a yes to, because I know where I think you're going, but I'm gonna have some big reservations going on, so anyhow, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Got a quick question for the Department of Revenue. You don't need to come up. If somebody wants to pay more than their fair share of property taxes, will you take the check? You.
Mr. Chairman, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. The tax bills are sent out. County treasurers do not accept overpayments and distribute that money. They balance the books. They're audited, just like the state of Wyoming, just like the Department of Revenue. I think the key related to any legislation when we're providing multiple paths to property tax relief for residential homeowners, somehow we have to look at when the dust settles. So you had mentioned the property tax refund program. We already have that program in place. It's funded for X amount of dollars. I don't see anywhere in this particular bill that says if there's other tax relief, let's say the 4% cap, the 25% that may pass, or a 50%, the long-term homeowners. There's no recognition of those in this bill. So that is just one thing that I would definitely go back, see where we're at, and possibly after this session, maybe that's where this concept comes in, because we haven't even talked about M&A, lots of moving parts. But to your point, no, your county treasurer will not put any extra money in the coffee fund.
Well, if we get all the tax bills through, we won't have to worry about a surplus.
And I would consider that a friendly amendment, Senator Pappas, if you, Mr. Chair, if I would consider that a friendly amendment if you wanted to amend this bill to say that those folks that didn't want this reimbursement, but they'd rather apply it to the state coffers, then I would happily take that amendment into the bill.
Are we ready for roll call? Donna, will you call the roll?
This is a roll call vote on Senate File 177, Primary Residence Property Tax Fund. Senator Case?
No.
Senator French?
Aye.
Senator Ide?
Aye.
Senator Pappas?
Aye.
Chairman McEwen?
Aye.
We have 4 aye and 1 no, Mr. Chairman.
Senate File 177 has passed the Revenue Committee. Does anybody have anything else? Yeah, we will adjourn then. That's the first